Hello, and welcome to Strange Dominions, where we attempt to unlock the mysteries of the unseen and unheard, unknown and unknowable. I am your host, Octavian Graves. Tonight, I speak with Alison Chicosky. Alison is a magician and creator of Practical Occult, an online store where you can buy pentacles, talismans, and other occult paraphernalia, as well as take classes and get advice on your magic. We speak about her beginnings in the occult, the PGM, talismans, and the paranormal. If you have seen something strange or unusual, such as a cryptid, spirit, UFO, or anything in between, please send me an email at strangedominionspodcast@gmail.com and you can be on the show. If you are enjoying the content we're making and want to get exclusive content, you can become a patron starting at just $4 a month. Patrons get 2 exclusive episodes every month, plus merchandise and the ability to contribute to the show. Without further ado, I bring you my interview with Alison Chicosky. All right, I am here tonight with Alison Chicosky. Alison is a scholar and practitioner of a variety of forms of thaumaturgy with a focus on results-based magic. While especially interested in both Solomonic magic and the Greco-Egyptian magic of the Greek magical papyri, she is also well-versed in soul flight and psychic magic of various kinds. The founder and force behind Practical Occult, she strives to provide pentacles and other enchanted items drawn from a broad background of rigorously studied ancient arts, leveraging the systems of the past for practical modern use. Alison, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm really happy to have you on. So, where did this all start for you? What was your beginnings in the occult and magic in the first place?
Really, I was kind of just always a spooky kid. I had spooky books. I was into the paranormal and sea monsters and cryptids, and I'd go to the library and come back with all sorts of interesting books. And I had personal experiences where I would see things out of the corner of my eye, or little childhood experiences, and it made me realize that there was a lot more going on than people were talking about, and I wanted to find out what was kind of behind the curtain.
I absolutely feel that. That's a very big motivator for me as well. So I know that you're well-versed in the PGM, and for my audience who may not know what that is, what is the PGM?
Well, the PGM stands for Papyri Graecae Magicae, which is the Latin name for the Greek magical papyri. Now, that's a collection of texts that has been bound together in several books that people are familiar with, the most recent one being the Hans-Dieter Betz version, where they've taken these texts from about 2,000 years ago, about the time of the New Testament, that were written in Egypt, but in Greek, because at the time it was the colonial era of Egypt, so they had been required to start keeping their administrative records in Greek, by the Ptolemies. So we have this body of work that was found over, like a several hundred-year span in different cities. So it's not a single body of work per se, but rather a lot of different texts with the same subject matter from the same period of time that have been several times translated together and published in singular books.
Beautiful. I'm a big fan of the PGM, and I think it's really interesting because when you look at the PGM, you can see the lineage of what we would call grimoire magic or ceremonial magic, and you can see the traces from certain PGM spells into grimoire stuff. And so it's really an essential piece of text for any magician or sorcerer coming in.
Yeah, well, part of the problem with the Greek magical papyri is it's not it's not a grimoire in the same sense that a lot of grimoires that we're used to are. And let me explain on that. So in many cases, when we look at grimoires, we're looking at the working notes of a magician or other sort of practitioner, but scholars believe that what we're seeing in these Greek magical papyri spells are in many cases kind of handbooks for working lector priests in Egypt, and who would handle all sorts of kind of mundane issues for people, including helping them find justice and love and things like that.
Yeah, and there are a lot of love spells in the PGM.
Yeah, it's funny. And some of the spells in the PGM, they were found, like, they're not just the texts, they're the completed spell. So for example, there's a couple of spells that were found by themselves rolled up around hair, like love spells. So that's to me says that's not someone's notes. That's a spell that they did with the materia to link it to the target in it. So there's definitely some of that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things about the PGM, and this is kind of common in a lot of forms of magic, is the ingredients that one would use for the spell. They're kind of hard to come by in the modern age. And I'm curious if you found workarounds for this or any advice for people who are wondering what they can do to find more common items to supplement with some of the harder to find items, or if that's just not possible, if you kind of have to do exactly as the spell requires.
It depends on the spell. I mean, there's certainly spells that are prohibitively hard, but some of those prohibitively hard spells are kind of unnecessary, in my opinion. So, for example, there's one spell to find a thief that involves taking the head of a drowned man and planting it in a field, planting flax on top of it, waiting until the flax grows, harvesting the flax, turning it into rope, and then eventually doing knot magic with that rope to find the thief. Like, that may work, but first off, nobody's doing it. And second, there's easier spells to find a thief, including in the PGM. So, when it comes to testing everything, I'm never going to test everything because some things are just prohibitively weird, or really there's easier methods. And I would gravitate towards, the one that didn't involve the severed head of a drowned man.
Yeah, absolutely.
They definitely didn't have that.
Yeah, no way. One of the things that is another interest to me is how wide the list of deities are that can be invoked or communicated with throughout the PGM. And it's really interesting to see how there is spells to Hecate and Thoth and Anubis, but also Adonai and Elohim makes its way in there.
Right. And the current scholarly belief on that is that these Egyptian lector priests that were likely doing this magic, because some of them were, like, for example, PGM4, the magical papyri of Paris, really does look like a practitioner's handbook. Some of the people that were doing these were probably lector priests, and they had a very diverse congregation. So, scholars believe that they're responding to the needs of the folks in our congregation to do that. But there's also a lot of syncretism. When Alexander the Great, went all across Asia Minor and northern Egypt like that, it really created a kind of a metropolis city in Alexandria. We all hear about the Library of Alexandria. Well, that was the Ptolemies that did that, and that's the same time period of the Greek magical papyri, where there was amazing push to get just texts all sorts of texts in there, and it was well funded.
Yeah, and you can really see. I mean, the spells in the PGM are very thorough, and I've worked a couple of them myself, and the results, when they're done right, they really come. And I'm curious about some of your results and what made you realize that this stuff was possible and real.
Well, I had already been doing magic before I got to the Greek magical papyri. So I'd been doing Solomonic magic before that, and I already knew that it worked. So I kind of didn't come into the Greek magical papyri from as a starting place. And honestly, I think if I had, I probably would have just been confused, as the as mentioned, the Greek magical papyri isn't really okay, here's what you do first, and here's what you do second, and here's some notes about this clearing things up. It's not like that. But I started doing the Stele of Jew first. That was my first PGM spell that I started to do regularly. And I had visions from it. I had like auditory experiences from it. There was really something there going on. And one of the many reasons why I picked up the Greek magical papyri in the first place is that I'd asked around to other friends of mine who were also practitioners, and I asked them what they recommended. And several people had recommended the Greek magical papyri as having magic that, the results just hit like a truck, right? Like if you do it right, it's so obvious that it worked.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. Now, the other thing that you're very into is talismans. Can you give us a little insight onto how you got started with that?
Sure, and also there's overlap there with the Greek magical papyri because several of the items that I make are out of it. So those items are generally referred to in the text as phylacteries, which are protective amulets. The way that I got into making them was probably the way that a lot of people get into magic, which is they had a need. Something came up, and I had a friend who was sick, and I wanted to help her. So I asked around about what might do that, and I was directed to Solomonic Pentacles. So I immediately made her one to try to help. So, and I think that is certainly one of the reasons why people get into magic, and also what a lot of people want from it, even though that isn't necessarily what everyone gets out of it. I think that we're all in a way looking for the magic of our childhood, the wondrous excitement sort of magic, where it seems like a lot of things today are kind of reduced to Jungian archetypes or, psychological transformation. And that's very modern because when you go all the way back to, the Renaissance and the Greek magical papyri, folks weren't using this for psychological self-help. They were using this to make actual change in their lives and get results.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And that brings up a good point about the psychological model versus the spirit model. Do you feel that the psychological model is coming back, or do you think the spirit model is more prevalent in today? Because I've seen, I know that chaos magic was very popular in the 90s, and that's almost strictly psychological, but I feel like the spirit magic and the spirit model is definitely coming back stronger in the last, 5-10 years.
I feel like I'm always confused as to why all of these models are mutually exclusive for some people, because it's certainly possible that both spirits exist and that our human minds are very powerful, and can do a lot of things that are beyond what we currently know as our capabilities. So, I will say that I hang out in more than one chaos magic group. And I kind of do that to keep an open mind and see where people are coming from. So as a result of being in those spaces, I do see a lot of people that, really reduce magic to just the, well, if I can change my outlook on the world, then I can attract this to me, or, I will make a sigil and forget about it and, bring this to me. And if that's working for people, I'm definitely not here to say don't do it. I would just like people to know that the wondrous magic really is out there, and for them to know where to look when they're ready for that.
Beautifully said. And I absolutely agree that I think that the two models can work together. We've seen a lot over the years in the paranormal about theories that whatever phenomena is happening, whether it be cryptids, ghosts, UFOs, it's possible that they are using our mind and subconscious as a way to connect with us, or, come about into our physical reality through our subconscious. So there definitely is something to be said about that. One thing that I wanted to ask you about in the PGM is, at least in the Hans Dieter Betz version, there is a lot of spells and charms. And I'm curious, what would you say is the difference between those two terms?
I didn't really give it much thought, but the word charm has a lot of different definitions. There's definitely multiple types of magic in the Greek magical papyri. So you have these long rituals with complicated incense and sacrifices and phylacteries and all sorts of things. But then you also have like simple folk magic, where it's like, take a piece of paper or papyrus in this case and scribble, like 5 symbols on it to cure a scorpion sting. So it's really eclectic, like I said, because it's not a single grimoire, like a one person wrote it type of situation. But I do like experimenting with some of the really simple stuff. So for example, the scorpion sting charm that I mentioned, I have used it, and it's worked on a bee sting, a spider bite, a scorpion sting that my friend had, and then some unidentified thing that stung a child. So, I mean, that was definitely, I know that this works, because if it works on a crying, 6-year-old, and they're like, the pain went away, then the pain went away.
Yeah, absolutely. You do the practical occult online, and where you make talismans and other magical items. Could you tell us about how that started?
Yeah, well, as mentioned, I started making Solomonic pentacles out of a need that my friend had, and they worked so well that I just started making more and more of them. Like it was a very big hobby for me. So at the time, I was working in corporate America, and I was cranking out just dozens and dozens of pentacles that I exclusively gave away to friends. So I'd been doing that for months and months and months, and then I got called into a meeting at work, and it turns out that they laid off my whole team. So it was like, wow, okay. So then this job that I expected to finish the rest of my career out at, was just kind of yanked out from under me. And as I was applying for other jobs, every time I applied for another corporate job where I'd have to put on a suit and take a train to go to the city and sit in an office for basically like 9 hours, including my lunch break, I would just cringe because I didn't want to do that. I just didn't want to do that again. So I sent off my resume. I applied for jobs, but every time I did it, I was like, ooh, I kind of hope I don't get it. And then as that was going on, people started messaging me and saying, hey, these pentacles that you make, I'd like to buy them. So having completely not thought about selling them before, I found myself in a situation where I both needed a new career, money, and people were looking to buy a thing that I already did. So I started doing that.
Well, that's really cool. I really wish I could have that.
Yeah, it's been the best decision of my life, really. It's just been it's amazing to be able to wake up and have the whole day to yourself and not feel tied down to something that, even though I liked my job, it's a chore to spend that much of your time doing something that you're not passionate about.
I absolutely agree. For the people who may not know, how would you describe a talisman, and what is your method of creating them and imbuing them with the power that they are said to have?
Right. So there's a lot of splitting hairs over talisman versus amulet versus pentacle versus phylactery, and I'm not sure that all of it's necessary. But the Solomonic pentacles that I make, and actually also the phylacteries from the PGM, they're all made in rituals where spirits are called and they're asked to empower the items. So in all cases, for all of the systems that I work out of, they're not completely separate. In that I'm lighting candles in all of them, I'm using incense in all of them, and I'm calling spirits in all of them. They just differ according to the texts that I'm reading, or whether or not they require any sort of astrological timing. And for pentacles, that's very light. They're not looking at electional astrology. So it's not everything that's going on, but I do look at the moon phase and planetary hours and planetary days, and those are the sort of things that I factor into the Solomonic consecrations. Did that answer your question? Or
Yes, no, absolutely. And I was originally going to ask you, what is the difference between a pentacle and a talisman? But I think you answered that one as well.
Right, and honestly, like these magic items, they work differently sometimes. So, in some cases, there's a spirit that lives in them, and in some cases, there's just a token to call a spirit. Like having a spirit on speed dial, or that the spirit looks through the amulet to kind of keep an eye on you, but it doesn't actually live there. So, in the grand scheme of things, they're all effective, but they all have a little difference to how they work. And that's also true for Solomonic pentacles, in that they're different from each other. Some of them call elementals. For example, there's a Mars one that I don't sell that makes hail and tempests, and that calls elementals. But not all of the pentacles call on elementals. So that's just one way that they're different.
Yeah, and I noticed that like certain talismans or pentacles for different planets, there are multiple pentacles for different planets, and they seem to do similar things, at least in their description, but they're all very different in what they actually do. Is that correct?
It is, and part of what I've been doing at Practical Occult is, in addition to calling up the spirits and just asking them what they do, we also field test things, and part of that is for my own peace of mind because I want to know how these products perform out in the real world and what they're actually doing, like what's practical about this. A lot of people will buy a magic item and they're like, wow, I can feel it. It's got vibes, there's definitely something going on here. And I'm like, that's great, but what does it do? And sometimes the answer is nothing, because it's just like a magically empowered object that someone's made. But it's not doing a thing. So I like to know that all of my products do things and that they work fairly consistently. And if they don't, I don't release them as products.
That's a very good business model to have, for sure. If someone buys a pentacle for you, how do they work exactly? I mean, do they need to be charged, or can you just wear them and they work on their own? What's the the instructions for working with pentacles on an individual level?
Well, it's as I said, it can be different depending on the pentacle, but when you receive them from Practical Occult, they're definitely all consecrated, and ready to go. Some of them can simply be worn, like the protection ones, best when worn or carried. But for example, the second of Jupiter, I don't usually wear that. That's one for wealth and riches. I just keep that on my little wealth altar in my ritual room, and it kind of lives there. In fact, my personal one doesn't even have a hole punched in it so that it can be worn as a necklace. So I'd have to get a little case or something to put it in if I wanted to even wear it. But it works fine, on my altar. However, like I said, specifically some of the protection ones, they have to be carried on your person.
I have the Fifth of Venus pentacle from you, and I haven't tried it out yet, but I'm very keen to.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Definitely the Venus ones, if you wear them out, people will notice, and they'll respond differently. So I can't remember if I was wearing a Venus pentacle in the story or if I'd just come out of a Venus ritual. But I think I might have just come out of a Venus ritual, and then I went to a coffee shop to get some coffee, and I was in line, and this older lady was like, "You remind me so much of my granddaughter. Can I give you a hug?" And it was just it was really sweet, but I could tell that it was kind of the magic working, because Venus magic just makes people like you. They want to help you. I once wore a Venus pentacle when I went hiking, and I was there was some rock climbing, and I was dirty and sweaty, and other hikers on the trail just kept stopping to offer me bottled water or like snacks or compliment my hiking shoes. And I was like, I have never been on a hike like this in my entire life. It was just so noticeable.
That's really cool. When someone wears, let's say Fifth of Venus or a Second of Venus, I know you've mentioned talking to the Venus, the pentacle, to help it do its job. Is there a certain script that one should use, or a way of talking about it, or can you just do it completely casually?
I'm usually pretty casual about it, and I'm usually, I'll just often rub the pentacle or breathe on it and say, spirits of the Fifth of Venus, Please help me with whatever. Now, you can also get more complicated. You can call on the 4 spirits associated with what I refer to as the control pentacle. So my pentacles are double-sided, and usually on the back there's a pentacle that says, this pentacle is proper for working with all spirits of Venus, especially those who are written on this pentacle, or something very, very generic like that. So I usually just put that on the back of the specific ones to make them a little, more effective and more flexible. So you can call the 4 spirits on the back of the pentacle. And I've also, on my website, practicaloccult.com, I've got a resource section where I've been adding dozens of old newsletter articles and other things that we've written, which are going to include and do already include other ways to use pentacles, little rituals. For example, there's also a way to use pentacles in folk magic, and it doesn't even have to be pentacles that you got from Practical Occult. People can and do make these things on their own, sometimes out of paper or other things that maybe aren't as strong as, silver or gold or whatever. But, maybe you don't need it to be that strong. Maybe you just need a little bit of magic right now, and you can just do it yourself. So that's, we've got articles on that, about how you can make a 2nd of Jupiter prosperity lamp, how you can use them in mojo bags, and other things like that. I like to have guest authors that I commission to write for Practical Occult, because I certainly don't know every method of magic, and I don't know every way that things can be used, and I love to tap into other people's knowledge. So definitely check out the resource section of Practical Occult for all sorts of practical tips on using pentacles.
Well, that will definitely be linked in the show notes below during this episode. Just for my own inquiry, I have the 4th of Mercury, and I've had it now for a while, and I'm not quite sure what to do with it. And I'm curious, in your opinion, what does it do, and how can you use it? Another, Mercury Pentacles.
Yeah, so the 4th of Mercury is actually one of my all-time favorite pentacles. And I almost never wear it, but I usually just keep it at my desk when I'm researching or writing. The spirits that work with that are called the Alatori collectively, and they are considered to be emissaries that are able to answer questions. So in their role as emissaries, as a magical practitioner, I will sometimes have them bring me other spirits. So I'll say, bring me a spirit that's willing and able to help me with X. Or, in one situation, I was working with spirits that, astrological spirits that are very subtle, and I was having trouble perceiving their presence. So I called on the Alatori, and I was like, hey, those other spirits I just conjured, are they here? And they were like, yes, they are. And then I was able to get the Alatori to kind of translate for me, because the other ones were too subtle for me to perceive. Now that's things that I do because I do a lot of spirit magic. But on a more practical level, I find that as I'm writing and doing research, if I keep it right in front of me and get and ask the Alatori to help me, I will just find just amazing insights. I'll be maybe searching for one thing, and then all of a sudden come up on a quote that really explains something else that I've been confused about for years. Um, it's it's kind of hard to explain the how that works if you can't hear the spirits, because they still communicate with you even if you don't hear them. It sometimes feels like intuition, or um, just having like a great idea that came out of nowhere. Um, I'll also sometimes ask a question kind of in my head very loudly and immediately just hear them respond. Um, so there's that. Um, Additionally, I have I've dedicated customer service. So if anyone's bought a product from me and they've got specific situations that they're trying to solve and they don't feel like they're seeing any progress, just give us an email and we'll definitely get back and work with your individual situation.
That's awesome. One of the things that I've always wanted to try, and maybe you can give some insight into this, a lot of paranormal investigators and people into the paranormal, they kind of get sad because they can't see the spirits, or that they're not really having any kind of real-time interaction. And I'm curious if pentacles, and if there are any pentacles that could help with that and assist in being able to really perceive spirits and communicate with them properly.
Yeah, so the one to help us see spirits is, I believe, the fourth of the sun, and I've actually used it myself, and I had a really fascinating experience with it my first time, where I did a ritual, and I often work with a scryer who has much better psychic senses than I do. They've just spent really like 15 years training them up, and they're very, very good at it. So they saw the spirit before I did, but I had the pentacle, and I was looking into my scrying crystal, which is crystal ball, and I could see these pinpoints of light, which were the candles being reflected, the candles from the ritual. And then as I looked at it, it was like the pinpoints came closer and closer until they were being reflected in the eyes of the face. And it was like, have you ever used like a camera that you have to turn it to focus? It was like that. It was like slowly turning the lens to bring it into focus. And it came from like almost like a little wispy light hologram thing to sharpening into a very long, pointy, featured, humanoid-ish face. And I was like, wow, this, I'm seeing it, described it to my scryer, and they're like, yep, I've been seeing it for 5 minutes. So we definitely saw the same thing there.
That's really awesome. One of the things that I do on a weekly basis is I go to the woods and I give offerings to the local land spirits. And, I'm not in a ritual at that point. It's kind of just me in regular clothes with food and wine and incense, telling the spirits, hey, I've brought this for you, so we can form a relationship. But I'm always kind of disappointed because I don't really see or experiencing anything, and I'm wondering if those same pentacles could work in that context of just going out into nature and being able to perceive the spirits that are there.
I think they could, as long as you were in a receptive state of mind for it. I did get a delightful, very long feedback story from someone that I had gifted one of the solar pentacles to see spirits. And they wrote back and they told me that they had the ashes of a beloved pet cat in their office, and that one day they were, they had the pentacle and they were in their office and just, I guess in like a calm meditative state, and they looked over and they saw the ghost of their cat over by the ashes, kind of laying on them. And it was a very emotional moment for them. But that was an example of it being outside of a ritual, where they just, they weren't trying to see their cat, they just did.
That's awesome. I would love to try, something similar to that out in nature and see if maybe that pentacle can help me perceive some spirits that may be nearby that I just wouldn't be able to perceive otherwise. When one has a pentacle from you, does it matter, do they need to go by that pentacle's day and hour, or will that pentacle work any day of the week at any time?
It works anytime. So I've made it at a specific time, and now that it's made, it's just good to go.
That's awesome. Have you had any pentacles that people have bought from you that had some sort of adverse reaction or anything like that?
Oh yes. So I and this was we figured it out, but it was absolutely inexplicable to me at the time. I had made a Jupiter Honor and Glory pentacle for a friend who was also a practitioner, and it was one of the early testers. But almost as soon as they received it, they started having bad luck, and we worked together to get to the bottom of this. But it turns out in their specific case, they had other spirits that were offended that these new spirits had been put on the job. It was like, hey, this is my job. What do we need these other spirits for? I'm not okay with this. So it was like a spirit diplomacy situation where the adverse effects weren't actually caused by my pentacle. They were caused by the other spirits, but it was like a brief personality clash that he then had to placate his other spirits and be like, no, I'm not replacing you. I still value you, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I still feel kind of bad about that happening.
Well, that brings up a really good point because, just in my own life, I have the 4th of Mercury, the 5th of Venus, and the 2nd of Jupiter, and I've never worn them all at the same time. But I'm curious if there's if that's an okay thing to do, or if there are certain pentacles that shouldn't be worn together from different planets.
Yeah. So, as far as wearing multiple pentacles together, it's certainly okay to carry them together, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend wearing them in a way where they rub up against each other. And for totally mundane reasons, it's because the metal will scratch, right? So I've had a couple instances of people who just wear a bunch on the same necklace, and they all rub up against each other all day, possibly rubbing up against, like a zipper on their shirt or whatever. And then it causes scratches and damages them. So I would say maybe you can get a little creative if you want. Attach one to a belt loop, or wear one as a necklace and keep your wealth one in your wallet, or things like that. I know a bunch of people who keep the protection ones in their wallet. I've got a protection one that's clipped to my purse, and that's just where it lives. Also, I've been, slowly coming out with my practical accessories, which are different ways to utilize pentacles. So, I've got earrings and bracelets, a money clip, and things like that. So it's to avoid the I only have one neck issue with having so many necklaces.
That's a really good point. And for me, I use if I have my 5th of Venus on, I will keep my 2nd of Jupiter in my wallet and my 4th of Mercury in another pocket.
Right. So Solomonic magic is a decently broad category, uh, but also a style of magic. There's a lot of folks are familiar with the Key of Solomon, and however, a lot of folks aren't familiar with that. There's more than one of them. You know, there's lots of Keys of Solomon. Uh, there's a lot of different manuscripts that were in different languages. There's different versions. There's just a lot of different things going on there. So, um, I do Solomonic magic. Before before getting into Pentacles, I used to do a lot of uh, Trithemius rituals, which is the drawing spirits into crystals, and that was my main mode of ritual. But these days, now that I've made so many pentacles, and of course, I have a vast number of personal ones, like many more than I sell. Right, like I just experiment with them. I'm like, oh, what does this do? Um, while not everything is turns into a marketable product, I like to play around. Um, where was I even going with that?
I know how you feel. Trust me.
Yeah, it's been a long day. I'm sorry. What was the question again?
I was just curious about the kind of Solomonic magic you did. I mean, if you are doing like full like evocation or things like that, or a more stripped down version.
It's a more stripped down version, and I will recommend the book that I started out with when I got into grimoire magic and conjuring angels, and it's The Seven Spheres by Rufus Opus. Um, it's the Trithemius method, uh, stripped down and well explained. And honestly, that's what I needed. I really needed a very easy guide to get me started. Oh, I had been hanging out in Solomonic groups for almost a year before I picked it up and started doing that sort of magic. And I had been reading books about it and listening to other people that did it. And so many people made it out to be so hard and complicated that I was just kind of reluctant to get started, as I think a lot of people are. And then when I came across that book, back pre-pandemic days when we still had in-person conferences and could buy copies of books at the conference, I went to a conference in New Jersey where Rufus Opus was speaking, and he had copies of his book. I picked one up, and within about 2 weeks, I was working it, and I saw immediate results in my life that helped me in ways that I needed help. So I was like, wow, this really helped me, and I was just immediately sold on doing this magic. I was able to immediately get money from Jupiter spells. I was able to use magic to help friends with difficulties that they had, and I just wanted to see how far it goes. It was like an instant obsession.
Yeah, I have Seven Spheres. I haven't worked it yet, but that is on my list of things to do. When it comes to pentacles, is there a requirement for abstinence or fasting or anything like that, or does any of that affect the ability for the pentacle to work?
So there's more than one instruction method to making pentacles. As I mentioned, there's a lot of different um, keys of Solomon, and there's also more stripped down methods to do that. And honestly, at this point, I'm not fasting for 3 days or anything like that. But what I will say is that I do employ previously consecrated pentacles in rituals to create new pentacles, right? So the spirits are already full force there from previous rituals that I've done. So it's kind of stacked. And I feel that that's one of the things about the sort of magic that deals with spirits in general, which is something that isn't necessarily often talked about, and that's how it can be really hard to do the first ritual, right? Like you might need to do everything a specific way, but then once you've contacted that spirit, you can say to the spirit, hey, is there an easier way that I can call on you? In much the same way that meeting another person, you might have to, like, let's say you wanted to talk to, an executive of a company. You might have to call and talk to like a secretary, and they might say, oh, well, you have to fill out a form, make an appointment. There's different things that you have to do and hoops that might have to jump through. Then let's say you meet that person and they're like, oh, wow, you're really cool. Here's my personal cell. Just give me a call. You don't have to talk to my secretary. We're fine now. So in the same way, like spirit magic can be like that. And I genuinely feel like I have an amazing loving relationship with the spirits that I work with, and they're fully on board in helping me do this. It's putting good out into the world. It's checking off boxes for what they want to do as well as what I want from them. So I feel like we're very aligned in that. There's some weeks where I do 5 consecrations of different types of pentacles. So if I had to fast for 3 days for that, I'd be pretty out of luck.
Does that go for if someone buys a pentacle from you? Do they need to do any kind of, should they avoid sex or fast or anything like that? Or can they just live a totally normal life? I'm always worried about maybe offending the spirits if, I engage in just regular behavior. Just curious if that is an issue or if not.
So I'm going to say it is overall not an issue. There's a certain amount of respect, that I would imagine goes pretty far. So, for example, my let's say I'm wearing a pentacle bracelet. I'm certainly going to take that off before I go to the bathroom or do my dishes in the sink, and like get dirty food all over them. So I'm not going to do that. But I've definitely been wearing pentacles when I'm out sweating in this terrible humidity that's oppressing us this summer. I have definitely eaten food while wearing pentacles basically every day. So I think that it's very hard to make the pentacles not work. So it's not like one of those situations where, oh my gosh, I forgot to take this off and now it doesn't work. I've specifically I've done all sorts of accidental things with pentacles. Like I've had them in my pants pocket and then run them through the washer and dryer before. I don't recommend it, but they still worked. So I don't think they're as touchy as some of the other types of magic that might accidentally release the spirit if you do the wrong thing.
Very well said. I think that will put a lot of mind at ease, because I've heard people say that they stay away from pentacles because they're afraid of offending the spirits and having bad luck or anything like that.
And I've certainly heard all sorts of rules and regulations about things, and some of that turns out to be, well, my teacher told me that, and their teacher told me that, and I'm not here to say that any of that is wrong, but for me, I have pentacles all over my house. I wear them every day, and I just live my life with them. Additionally, I know of several people who actually have pentacle tattoos. Some of whom have said very good things about them working. So that brings up another interesting question, which is, if you have it literally on your skin in a way that you can't take it off, what does that mean about the way you have to live your life now? So.
That's very interesting. I never even thought about doing that. I don't have any tattoos myself, but we're coming down to the wire here. But I thought, as a last question to tie into some of the paranormal stuff, when you've been doing rituals or pentacles or anything like that, have you experienced any kind of strange activity that aren't normal or standard for your magical rituals?
I would say that there is a definite effect on the surrounding territory here, and it's interesting. I used to have a roommate years ago, and she worked a night shift. And I remember one time, it was a Friday, and I had done a Venus ritual, and she comes home very late, and I was still up. And she said, "Did you know that there's not only a herd of deer right outside, that window in that room, but there's also a lot of rabbits." So this was like 3 a.m. and there's just rabbits and deer all over my yard, right out in front of the window that I did the Venus ritual for, the room that I did the Venus ritual in. So I was like, okay, well, that's, they noticed something and they came to see it.
That's awesome. I have experienced a couple weird things when I've done my magic that I wouldn't expect to be a part of it.
I've also, in a lot of cases, there's been electrical issues, and sometimes, some of these stories are funny. There was one occasion where my friend Sarah Mastros, who's also a professional practitioner that I recommend, she was having folks record invocations as part of like an audio project that she was doing, and she asked if I would record an invocation. So I said sure. So I just went into my basement where it was very, very quiet, and did it on my phone, and then I sent it, and then I went to go do some work on my laptop, but my laptop wasn't working properly. So then I was like, all right, I'll do it on my iPad, and my iPad wasn't working properly, and then all of this stuff was like not working, and then I realized that I had just called a spirit for real and like left them hanging. Right? Like I did the invocation and I called them, but I didn't ask for anything or like say anything. So they were kind of like tapping me like, okay, I'm still here and you can't do anything else until we resolve this. So that was, I've seen them, minorly mess with my electronics like that. And I've also been on the phone and heard like EVP stuff. In one of my early PGM experiences, I have a friend who's very into Thoth, and I found an interesting spell in the PGM, and I was like, oh, I'll give him a call and I'll tell him about the spell. So I called them, we're on the phone and I'm chatting, and I'm like, yeah, and it says, blah, blah, blah. And I'm reading the spell off on the phone, and all of a sudden, like, this crazy EVP starts coming through, and I've never heard anything like it. And it turns out he also heard it, and it just kept happening. We kept trying to we got off the phone, and we had additional phone calls where this weird EVP stuff came through the line. And finally I was like, whatever spirit is trying to reach me right now, please stop, and I will call you. So I basically like went to my ritual room, set up a ritual, and did the whole PGM spell that I was just discussing with my friend on speakerphone.
That's awesome. That's a really cool story. Well, Alison, where can people find all of your information and things like that?
Practicaloccult.com.
Awesome. Well, that, like I said before, that will be in the show notes for everyone to check out. Alison, thank you so much for being here and coming on the show. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was delightful.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. That was my interview with Alison Chicosky. I loved having her on the show, and I will be having her again very soon. All of her links are in the show notes below. That's it for tonight, folks, and I will see you again in The Strange Dominions.